just another week, another titanic struggle between Donald Trump and activist courts, which are trying to rein in the president's agenda. Now, over the past 48 hours, there has been yet another hit via the judiciary to the Trump agenda, as an outfit called the U.S. International Court of Trade, I never heard of it either, ruled that the president's Liberation Day tariffs were illegal, finding that federal law did not grant him, quote, unbounded authority to tax imports from nearly every country around the world. Big news to be sure, but you know what? We got to go beyond the headlines here, because I think this story is less about tariffs, although that's a huge part of it, than it is about the eternal tension between the different branches of the American government. Though, for the record, while I am no fan of tariffs on allies like Australia, with whom the U.S. runs a trade surplus, I reckon it is absolutely fair game to belt China with whopping rate tariffs in retaliation for their currency manipulation, product dumping, intellectual property theft, and a host of other sins that have gone on for too long, unbalancing the global economy and hurting working Americans. But let's put that to one side. The court has spoken, and now another appeals court has temporarily allowed the tariffs to continue while a further challenge is considered. Now, this case is going to eventually make it to the Supreme Court, but in the process, the Court of Trade has just torpedoed two crucial processes. One, as the Trump administration works to land trade deals with trading partners around the globe, we can only hope or assume that Australia is somewhere in the queue. This ruling will only add uncertainty to the process. The question now is, will nations that do run trade surpluses with the U.S. and who practice their own forms of protectionism hit the pause button on negotiations, hoping that the courts will make the question irrelevant? And two, the second part of this is that the ruling throws a huge spanner in what is known as the reconciliation process for Trump's big, beautiful spending bill, which, you will recall from last week, only passed the House of Representatives by one single vote. Now, if tariffs and the hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue that they were supposed to raise are off the agenda, well, this may also cost the bill support among deficit hawks in the Republican Party, who will now worry that the spending will only increase government debt without any new revenue from tariffs to pay it down. The Washington Post, of course, cheered the court's ruling, saying it was Trump's greatest setback. But again, as others have pointed out, Donald Trump may have other ways through. But reading the generally gleeful reaction in the press to this court limiting presidential authority, it struck me that there was a connection to the other big story of the week, namely the latest revelations about just how utterly out of it Joe Biden was during his presidency, and the way the very same media that is today cheering a blow to Trump's authority spent 4 years covering for the lack of presidential authority and indeed competence when Joe Biden was president. Now, in the last 24 or so hours, Project Veritas released this undercover video of Democrat National Committee Vice Chair David Hogg suggesting that the answer to the question, just who was running the country, may have lain in the office of former First Lady Jill Biden, and in particular, in Jill Biden's chief of staff. Have a look.
Foundational question for me is, like, how corrupt is the DNC if so many people knew, or few people knew about Biden, well, the president of the United States?
I mean, I think the fact of the matter is the DNC is always going to be like a campaign arm of the president, ultimately. The bigger issue was like the inner circle that was around Biden. That's it.
And I can't stress you enough.
But Joe Biden's chief of staff, like, had an enormous amount of power.
Joe Biden?
Joe Biden's chief of staff.
That was like an open secret at that. Like, I would avoid him. Like, he was scary.
What was his name?
Anthony. I knew how he looked, but I'm like, the general public wouldn't know how this man looked. But he wielded an enormous amount of power, and I can't stress to you how much power he had in the White House.
Meanwhile, more evidence resurfaced this week of just how wide the cover-up of Joe Biden's condition went. A few days ago, Jake Tapper, who was, it must be said, part of the media's cover-up of Biden's competence, declared that the scandal over the hiding of Biden's decline ranks among the worst scandals in American presidential history.
It is a scandal.
Yes.
It is without question, and maybe even worse than Watergate in some ways.
Right.
Because Richard Nixon was in control of his faculties when he wasn't drinking.
Worse than Watergate, you say? Yet, back in 2023, folks like Mark Milley, the general who was the former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who famously said he wanted to understand white rage, whatever that is, told 60 Minutes that the man with the nuclear codes, Joe Biden, was perfectly fine.
I engage with him frequently and alert, sound, does his homework, reads the papers, reads all the read-ahead material, and is very, very engaging in issues of very serious matters of war and peace and life and death. So if the American people are worried about an individual who is someone who's making decisions of war and peace and has access to, makes the decisions of nuclear weapons and that sort of thing, I think they can rest easy.
Oh, just great. So, what do the fight between Trump and the courts over trade on the one hand and the cover-up of Joe Biden's mental state on the other have to do with one another? Well, the link is that both cases are ultimately about who runs the country, who is in charge. Is it unelected judges, bureaucrats, and advisors who were happy to run things when the president was, if not a vegetable, certainly not in full control, and are now pushing back when there is a president with a mandate to remake the country as per the wishes of the American people? Democracy is absolutely at stake in all of this here, but you know what? It just turns out it's not in the way it is being portrayed.